Matt Armstrong's world just flipped upside down, and nobody saw it coming. His father Tony has made a bold move, one that could completely derail the Miami workshop plans Matt had been building toward. What started as an exciting new chapter has quickly become a storm of tension and uncertainty. The stakes are higher than they appear, and the outcome could reshape everything ahead. What pushed Tony to act right now? And is there still time to turn things around? Let's get into it. The conversation about Tony and Matt's working relationship didn't start with a headline. It started quietly in Leicester, in small corners of the automotive community, between people who had been watching their work closely. But as the channel grew, those quiet conversations got louder. Opinions sharpened. Curiosity turned into real scrutiny. People started asking a straightforward question. How much was Tony actually doing? Some were convinced he was the engine behind everything, running the show from behind the scenes while Matt took the spotlight. Others believed Matt was carrying the weight largely on his own. The debate split audiences and kept growing. What made it more complicated was Tony's background. This was a man who had spent decades as a working mechanic, building real knowledge through real experience in real garages. That kind of history naturally made people wonder how much of it was quietly fueling everything they saw on screen. Meanwhile, Matt came from a completely different direction: content creation, storytelling, editing, and understanding what makes an audience stay tuned. As the channel picked up more attention, a new layer of criticism emerged. Some people started asking whether Matt had an unfair head start, whether the father-son connection gave him access and advantages that other creators simply didn't have. It became one of the most repeated talking points in comment sections and automotive forums. Was the success earned, or was it built on a foundation others couldn't access? One particular concern kept resurfacing. People suspected Tony was quietly handling the hardest parts of every build while Matt simply stayed in front of the camera. That idea planted doubt in a lot of minds. Were viewers actually seeing the true effort behind each project, or just a curated version of it? But as more information came out over time, the picture looked nothing like what the critics had assumed. The relationship between Tony and Matt was not built on favoritism or shortcuts. It was built on mutual respect, with each person contributing something the other couldn't fully replace. Tony brought something that only comes with time: decades of hands-on mechanical experience, developed long before YouTube existed and long before anyone was filming garage work for an audience. His understanding of vehicles was instinctive and deep. Matt, on the other hand, had built an entirely different skill set. He understood how to tell a story, how to frame a moment, and how to create content that people actually wanted to watch. When the two of them worked together on camera, it didn't look forced because it wasn't. Each person stayed in their lane, and those lanes complemented each other perfectly. Even as that became clearer, the questions didn't stop. They just shifted. The next wave of criticism focused on money. A common assumption began spreading, that access to Tony's garage meant free tools, free parts, and free workspace. The argument was simple. Car builds are expensive, so if Matt had all of that handed to him, wasn't the whole thing built on a hidden advantage? Would any of it have happened the same way without that support? Tony pushed back on that directly. He explained that Matt was never treated as a special case inside the business. He worked like anyone else would, earning his place, not inheriting it. Even during the years when BMX was still central to Matt's life, he was working multiple part-time jobs on the side to fund his projects and cover his own costs. That meant food delivery shifts, bar work, time in automotive retail, and hours spent in tuning shops. The parts didn't appear on their own. The skills didn't either. The garage gave Matt a place to learn, but it didn't remove the need for hard work. It just made the hard work possible. As people began to understand that, the tone of the conversation shifted. But one more question was still sitting there. If financial support wasn't the hidden advantage, then what about the actual early builds? How could someone so young complete such complex repairs without a more experienced hand doing most of the heavy lifting? The doubt was real, and as the projects grew in complexity, it only got louder. Tony addressed it head-on. He confirmed that Matt was the one doing the work on those early projects. The knowledge came from growing up around the garage. Years of watching, absorbing, and eventually doing. When problems came up, Tony offered guidance. But the tools stayed in Matt's hands. The decisions were Matt's to make. The mistakes were Matt's to learn from. That's exactly why the early builds weren't flawless. They weren't meant to be. They reflected a person genuinely developing their skills, and the improvement from one project to the next made that clear. Later builds, like the Ferrari 430, brought a fresh round of speculation. Some assumed that a project of that scale meant Tony had quietly taken over. But the reality was straightforward. It was a joint effort. Both of them worked through it together, each handling different responsibilities based on what they did best. The result came from collaboration, not from one person carrying the other. That pattern repeated itself throughout the channel's growth. Every time the audience expanded, new questions followed. Every time one question got answered, another took its place. That cycle is actually very common when people watch a family working together in public. Viewers want to know if the success is genuine, if the support is fair, if the effort is real. Those questions come from a natural desire to understand what's actually happening behind the camera. When all the pieces finally came together, the full picture was far simpler than the speculation suggested. The relationship between Tony and Matt wasn't about one person giving another an unfair advantage. It was about combining experience with energy, trust built over years, and a shared love for the work. They weren't standing one behind the other. They were standing side by side, each bringing something the other couldn't replicate. That balance is what made their work rise above the noise, and that foundation is what everything else was built on. Anyone who watches Matt's build videos regularly has noticed the same thing. Tony Armstrong keeps showing up. And when he does, he's never just hanging around. He's pointing something out, catching a detail someone else missed, or steering the approach in a direction that makes more sense. That consistent presence makes viewers curious. What's really going on when the camera isn't rolling? What Tony adds goes beyond technical input. His presence changes the feeling of the entire video. The content stops being repair footage and starts feeling like something real. He steps in during builds to identify problems, suggest next steps, and sometimes explain why something went wrong in the first place. That kind of involvement shifts the whole atmosphere of the workshop. Instead of a controlled production environment, it starts to feel like a genuine workspace, people figuring things out together in real time without a safety net. Most automotive channels chase perfect results. Here the process is what matters. The unscripted conversations, the honest reactions, the moments of disagreement. All of it keeps the audience engaged because none of it feels staged. Matt made an early decision to bring family into his work, and that decision quietly became one of the channel's greatest strengths. Every time Tony appears on screen, the tone warms up. Feels less like content and more like an actual relationship playing out in front of the camera. That's extremely hard to manufacture. And the audience knows it. Would the channel feel the same without that presence? Almost certainly not. The father and son dynamic creates moments that no amount of scripting could produce. A repair that goes sideways, a tool that refuses to cooperate, a plan that falls apart midway through. These moments land differently when there's someone else in the room reacting honestly alongside the person experiencing it. Tony's years in the garage give him the ability to read a problem quickly and respond calmly. When Matt runs into something unfamiliar, Tony steps in with a clear explanation, but he never takes over. He guides and then steps back. That restraint is just as important as the knowledge itself. It keeps Matt in the driver's seat while giving him the support he needs to move forward. That balance is something the audience picks up on almost immediately. Tony carries the weight of experience. Matt brings the energy and the willingness to push into uncomfortable territory. When those two things meet, the chemistry is effortless. It's both educational and genuinely entertaining to watch. The relationship between the two of them is probably the single biggest reason the channel continues to hold its audience. Cars matter, yes. The builds are impressive. But the real draw is the dynamic between these two people. It gives the content a dimension that pure mechanical content simply can't offer. When a build goes wrong, the camera catches it all. Matt's frustration, Tony's steadiness, the slow process of working back toward a solution. Those exchanges feel honest in a way that is nearly impossible to fake. Viewers aren't just watching metal being fixed. They're watching two people navigate a challenge together, with all the friction and trust that comes with a real relationship. They can laugh at each other, push back on each other, and still get back to work without the air turning sour. That's what makes it relatable. That's what makes it human. Imperfections, it turns out, are a feature rather than a flaw. If every build came together without a hitch, the content would feel flat. It's the setbacks, the course corrections, and the unexpected moments that make the eventual success feel earned. Tony's calming presence and Matt's raw energy create a rhythm that carries viewers from the beginning of a project all the way to the end. When something finally clicks, the reaction is real, and that realness is what brings people back every time. Tony's relationship with attention is worth noting on its own. Even as the channel grew into something with a genuinely large following, he never shifted into someone chasing the spotlight. He shows up, contributes, and steps back. There's no performance in it. That consistency keeps the focus where it belongs, on the work, while still making the partnership feel essential. When someone is clearly comfortable without needing to take center stage, everything around them feels more grounded. Tony never looks like he's playing a role, and that comes through clearly on screen. Real conversations replace performances. That difference is subtle, but audiences absorb it without even realizing it. The emotional depth of their partnership came into full view in 2025, when Matt took on the rebuild of a flood-damaged Aston Martin DBX, not as a regular project, but as a surprise for Tony. From the first moment, this build carried a different kind of weight. It wasn't just about the car. The question viewers kept asking was simple. Why this car, and why does this feel so personal? The answer unfolded gradually. Before the channel had an audience, before any of the success existed, Tony was already there. Lending tools, sharing knowledge, offering encouragement when there was no guarantee any of it would go anywhere. No following. No attention. No safety net. Just a father showing up for his son and believing in something that hadn't proven itself yet. That kind of support doesn't have a price tag. The Aston Martin rebuild was Matt's way of closing that loop. What Tony had given freely years ago was being returned, not with money, but with effort, time, and intention. When the car was finally revealed, no explanation was needed. The moment spoke for itself. The connection it represented was obvious to everyone watching. The audience felt it too. The video crossed 6 million views, not because of the car and not because of the technical work, but because of what the whole thing meant. People had watched the bond between father and son develop over years of content, and this project brought all of it to a single point. The honesty of that moment, the genuine emotion behind it, reminded everyone why they started watching in the first place. It was never just about the builds. It was always about the relationship driving them. That trust, built slowly and honestly over years, became the channel's most valuable asset. The audience kept coming back because they knew what they were going to get. Something real. And that foundation is exactly what makes everything that comes next matter even more. Heading into the final months of 2025, the nature of Matt's projects began to change in a serious way. What had once been demanding but manageable builds evolved into something operating on a completely different level. The risks were bigger. The complexity was deeper. The margin for error had shrunk dramatically. This was no longer just restoration work, it was a test of everything that had been built and learned up to this point. The most striking development was a heavily damaged Bugatti Chiron Per Sport sitting in Miami. Just the name sets it apart. This wasn't a rare car in the loose sense of the word. Only around 60 of them were ever built. That number changes the entire calculation. It raises one very direct question. Why take on something this rare and this unforgiving when safer options exist? The car's history made the decision even more loaded. It had originally belonged to American influencer Alex Gonzalez. After a serious incident, the damage was severe enough that insurance companies declared it a total loss. It was written off and sent to auction. A machine built to those standards completely abandoned by the people who insured it, and now being considered for a full rebuild. That's not a comfortable position to step into. Matt stepped into it anyway. He flew to Miami to inspect the car in person, a clear signal that this wasn't casual interest. The project demanded everything. Sourcing parts for a car with 60 units in existence isn't a logistics challenge. It's a puzzle with very few available pieces. Every component required precision, patience, and the right connections. There was no room to improvise. At this level, a wrong decision doesn't just cost time. Costs everything. Running alongside the Bugatti project was a crashed Ferrari F430 that entered the picture around July of the same year. The car had been used as a rental, meaning it had passed through dozens of different drivers with varying levels of care before the crash even happened. That kind of history creates uncertainty that's hard to fully account for. Restoring it meant hunting down original parts, matching manufacturer standards across every detail, and layering in a Capristo exhaust installation on top of everything else. The job wasn't just to fix the car, it was to improve it without losing what made it the car it was. Both projects made one thing undeniable: Tony's role had become more important than ever. Instinct developed over decades in a garage doesn't transfer through instructions. When a system behaves unexpectedly, or a component doesn't respond the way it should, that kind of deep mechanical knowledge is the difference between finding the answer and getting stuck. Tony provided the diagnostic grounding that allowed each problem to be approached methodically rather than frantically. That steadiness mattered enormously when the stakes were this high. Their partnership, built not in a single season but across years of shared work, shared mistakes, and shared wins, carried a weight that became visible in every major project. Consistency, trust, the experience of facing hard problems side by side and coming out the other end. Those things don't come from talent alone. They come from time. Tony showed no signs of stepping back. If anything, the increasing complexity of the work seemed to draw him further in. The direction was unmistakable, not away from the pressure but straight into it. The workshop itself had grown to match. What started as a space for learning had quietly become something capable of handling restorations at the highest level. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of the consistent willingness to take on more, learn faster, and raise the standard with every project. At the center of it all was one constant: adaptation. Every new car brought new systems, new problems, and new demands. Rather than approaching each one with caution, both Matt and Tony moved toward the challenge. They accepted the difficulty and worked through it step by step. That's what made the journey worth watching. Not just the cars and not just the results, but everything that happened in between. The learning, the setbacks, the progress, the moments where something finally worked. What keeps all of this moving forward? Is it a love of cars? Probably. But it feels like something more than that. Feels like a drive to take on what looks impossible and find a way through it. And based on everything that's happened so far, that drive hasn't faded. If anything, the bigger the challenge gets, the stronger the motivation becomes. If you have thoughts on Matt and Tony's journey, drop them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you check out the video on your screen before you go.